Welcome to the Diamond Valley Writers Guild, and I want to welcome everybody, our members, our guests, and our special guests, Tim Chazmar and Mark Savage. We're happy to have you here today, and we're looking forward to hearing about screenwriting and anything else you might care to tell us. I wanted to mention right off the bat that Michelle and the technical team are looking for people to help out and to learn the technical aspects of broadcasting from the library on our hybrid Zoom. And if you have an interest in that, please send her a note at dvwritersguild@gmail.com. Also, the Guild is looking for a logo. So if any of you are artistic, please send in your version of what a logo should look like, and the board will be happy to consider it. You could go down in history. Okay. I just want to welcome everybody. It's always great to be among writers, creative people. And that's what makes the world go around. I love people who are creative, and especially people who love to write. And it's a very difficult task and yet a rewarding task. And we're always learning. And that's one of the good parts about being together. Okay, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Good morning, everybody. In your chat, if you're online, I put information on how to join Diamond Valley Writers Guild. We're going very fast on our membership renewals. I'm very happy with it so far. At the end of March, however, if you have a book on our website, which is part of the member benefits, is to be able to have a link to a buy link for your books. At the end of March, we'll begin removing those that didn't renew. So please, please, please get your renewal in either by check or through PayPal. And of course, you know, we'd love to have anyone who is not currently a member to join. If you have a book or are about ready to publish a book, we have several avenues that help you market that book, including shout outs. So again, the information's in the chat, and I'll be sending out probably an email this week, a reminder notice about renewals. Thank you.
Okay, and now I'll turn it over to our editors of our magazine, Straight Jackets Magazine, the wonderful Ellen Wolf and Cheryl McGuire.
Mute myself. Hi, everyone. Good morning. And we've been a team of three, Cheryl McGuire, myself, and Jolynn Buring, who passed away not too long ago. And I'm very happy to announce that we have a new editor to work with us on Straight Jackets, and that is Sandy Schuster-Hubbard. Sandy, do you want to give us a little wave? I see you sitting there in the room. We're really excited. Sandy is a wonderful editor and has a great sense of humor. And to say nothing of the very interesting t-shirts she wears. So welcome, Sandy. The magazine, we're getting ready to do our fall issue. A lot of you have been submitting. We're grateful for that. The deadline for the spring issue is March 22nd, so you have 4 days left. Our published date is April 15th. Is that right, Cheryl? April 15th. Okay, good. And we do have so please send your submissions. We're still open to receiving them. We do have a column called My 10 Favorite Books. And basically it's written by the members. We're looking for somebody who would like to write about their 10 favorite books for this issue and for future issues. So if you're interested, please shoot an email to straightjacketsmagazine@gmail.com, and it's STRAIT for those of you who don't know that, jackets. So we look forward to seeing that. And basically it's just telling us what your 10 favorite books are in a very short blurb about why they're your favorites. So we've had some really interesting ones in the past. I want to acknowledge everyone who has contributed to Straight Jackets magazine. Since we changed to our new platform, the one we're currently using, we introduced it in 2017. I sat down and I looked at all of the issues, all 17 issues from the past 6 years, from 2017 to 2022. And we have published a total of 205 stories and poems over the past 17 issues, which averages about 12 per issue. We've been as high as 15 and as low as 10. We had 71 members who published once, and we had 134 members who were published more than once. So I thought, well, let's see who our most prolific writers are. And our all-time most consistent, most prolific contributor is none other than Howard Feigenbaum, who has been published in 17 out of 17 issues. Yay, Howard, thank you. We can always rely on you. Second place goes to Daniel Kuttner, who published 11 stories. Third place with 8 stories published were Greg Porterfield. There's a tie. Greg Porterfield, Gerald Burns, Jolynn Buring, and Judy Murray. Tied for 4th place with 7 stories published, Valerie Eitzen, Thad Buckley, and Cheryl McGuire. And tied for 5th place with 6 stories, Lynette Tucker, Dixie Ayala, and yours truly, Ellen Wolf. So I just thought that was fun to take a look, and I really wanted to let you know how much we appreciate your stories, and we love reading them. Cheryl, do you have anything to add?
Just to back up what you're saying, Ellen, in that that's the joy for the editors, is to get your stories. I know what it feels like to be published, and it's kind of magical. So thank you for participating, and write on and continue sending them in. Thank you.
Right. And that's the Straight Jackets magazine report.
Okay, great report. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to members' recent publications and successes. Is there anyone here who would like to tell us some recent success that they've had? Karen?
Am I unmuted? No,
Yes, you are.
I'm unmuted.
Mhm.
Okay. I was just going to add something to Ellen's report. I listened to a program on pitching your stories to magazines. And if they are asking for things that you've published in the past, you can actually put a link to those stories that have been published in Straight Jacket as your credits, as well as, Howard, your stories on Substack. You can also use a link to them as your credits.
Mhm.
So just add that.
Oh, that's great to know. Thank you for that. And for the readers of the magazine, you can link it to your Facebook page. You can link it to your other social media. And you can also, if you read someone's story and you really like it, you can like their story. And everyone appreciates letting others know that A, they have been read, and B, it's been enjoyed. So thanks, Karen.
Okay, anybody else have something to share with us?
Hi there. I'm Tad Bogdan, just joined the group, and I'm a first-time author after spending my career in high tech, the business side of high tech. And I first did a test publishing on Amazon on Kindle and got 4.8 out of 5 reviews on it. And so I just in February did the first print release of the book, paperback and hard copy. So I'll be submitting that to the magazine for hopefully some good exposure.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I have a comment. I'll
Okay.
just mention I'm Dennis Conrad, and I'm the author of The 2 Cent Piece. It is the first book in the In God We Trust series. And I realized that, and I just heard that SCBWI, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, is having a contest. and they have the Crystal Kite Reader's Choice Award that is due in the next couple of days, and so people can look that up. But they have a whole host of awards that they give out, and my agent recently sent around a note. If you have something that you want to do, please go ahead, and if you're trying to promote your book, make sure you get entered to contests. Then you can get a seal or something like that on your book when you're finished. So I just want to encourage everybody to look into SCBWI if you're a children's book author and participate there. And I don't mind the competition. It always helps us all. Thank you so much.
Dennis, I have a question for you. Dennis,
Yes,
does it have to be a published book or can it be a manuscript for this contest?
that has to be a published book, but they do have ones for manuscript. And
Okay.
this is for 2002 publications. So you can look at the rules on scbwi.org.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else who wants to share?
I don't think there's anyone in the room.
Okay, well, I'll be the last one. Then I'll share that I am publishing on Substack, which has been very interesting, and I enjoy it. And I was publishing short stories, but now I'm publishing a book for free. And if you want to take a look at it, it's Howard Feigenbaum Substack, howardfeigenbaum.substack.com. And the book I'm publishing on Substack as a weekly serial is called Hot Zone. And it's about the Chinese economically colonizing Panama. And I happened upon this doing some research, and I have a character. It's the third book in the series called Benny Goldfarb, Private Eye. And he ends up in Panama trying to find out how far the Chinese have penetrated. And my research showed they really have penetrated very far in real life. They have buildings on each end of the canal, and they're using getting the rare woods out of Panama. So that part of it is reality based, and but it's always good to have reality in fiction. So take a look at it. It's free, and I'm about 3/4 of the way on my weekly episodes. Okay. Anything else? Anybody want to share? Okay, then let's move on to Sandy Schuster Hubbard and her writing tips.
Howard, can I add one thing before Sandy? Sorry, Sandy.
Go ahead.
Howard inspired me with writing for Substack. And so I thought that would be fun to try. And I've published a couple of stories with his help. And it is so much fun to have a record of how many people have read that. When you publish something, I just checked mine, and over 200 and some people have read the piece that I published there. And 28 of them have subscribed. So then you are collecting readers that you can hopefully turn over to read some of your books that you have published outside of that. So I would encourage everyone to write for Substack. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Thank you,
Yes.
Howard.
Oh, you're welcome. And you can see the email address of the people who subscribed, and so you can make a record of it.
Right. You can also see how many people liked it so well that they sent it to some of their friends, which I think is really fun as well.
Mhm. Okay, Sandy, you're on.
Okay. I'm going to talk to you today about filter words. And I first learned about filter from Jim and Vicky's critique group. He didn't like seam, he didn't like felt, and those words. So I learned, and I read some publishers and editors in terms of looking at sharing some additional things about filter words. And the definition that I liked best out of what I found was filter words are excess words that put a barrier between the reader and what the character is experiencing. They do this by placing the character in the central spotlight instead of the experience. And generally, filter words are those 5 senses of sight, taste, smell, touch, feel. And they also include the sensory verbs of look and hear and heard and listen, taste, and so on. So sometimes filter words creep into our writing as thought processes where we say, I realized, I knew, I remembered, I decided, I noted. And those all remove the reader from absolute or actually experiencing the what the character is doing. Filter words subtly tell the reader to look at the character, not through them or what they are really thinking and feeling. So think of it as the difference between watching the recording of a play versus being there in the audience. Every filter word in the story, word in your story, reminds the reader that they're not right there in the audience. And I like this example, an example of filter words in action. John heard the door click and looked up from his paperwork to see his assistant escort the client in. Sarah, his client, looked like a young woman, and he knew she was barely out of her teens. When he stood up to greet her with a welcoming smile, he noted the way she took a step back and glanced at his hands before meeting his gaze. He felt a sinking feeling as he wondered if she was checking for a weapon. He realized this one would need more healing than he'd been told. Well, that was a real plethora of filter words in there. So if we take those out, here's one possibility. The door clicked and John looked up from his paperwork as his assistant escorted the client in. Sarah, his client, was a young woman barely out of her teens. When he stood up to greet her with a welcoming smile, she took a step back and glanced at his hands before meeting his gaze. His heart sank. Was she checking for a weapon? This one would need more healing than he'd been told. And I think we don't have to take a vote that second one was much, much more interesting and better. Occasionally, one can use the filter words, but they have to really help us understand what the character's feeling. And I have lots of examples of those. I'm not going to do those, but an example of having, oh, I've lost it, sorry. Where did I lost it? Well, well, you can use filter words when it's necessary to the meaning of the sentence, such as, he wished he could go back to those warm summer days when he had sat on the back steps and watched her dance among the flowers. Without the filter, we'd have to rephrase it like this. He wished he could go back to those warm summer days when he'd sat on the back steps as she danced among the flowers. It's similar, but it loses the meaning of his attention being focused on her. So if you are not in a critique group and you have to find your own, it can be very useful to do the find and replace part of Word so that you can put in the filter words, and it'll highlight in your copy where those are. And then you make a decision on whether or not that is really enhancing what you have to say, or is it detracting? Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. And is Lynette here? Lynette Tucker?
Lynette had another commitment, but she's going to try to join later.
Okay, yeah, I wanted her to speak to shout outs. I think I omitted that
I could
inadvertently.
cover that if you'd like. It's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the benefits of membership is that if you have a book coming out and it was published, for example, in February, we do a March shout out of all books of members that are published with links to buy. So that's a cool benefit. You would just email the guild. I'll have Lynette send out, if you haven't already received one recently, she usually sends out her guidelines and what she needs in order to accomplish that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll turn it over to you, Michelle, for introduction of our guest speakers.
Yeah, hold on a second. I'm trying to figure out how to unpin myself. Technology, it's a novel concept. So I would like to introduce our guest speakers. Today we have Tim Chazmar, and Tim is and Mark Savage. And Tim's bio is that he's an award-winning speaker, headlining comedian, actor, producer, screenwriter, and bestseller whose books include Soul Trader, Modern Madness, and others that shall not be named, as they were written while working as a ghostwriter for some of today's hottest authors and celebrities. His work has been included in short story collections, notably Chicken Soup for the Soul, and has appeared in numerous magazines, newspapers, and on websites including Fangoria and First Comics News. Tim's collaboration with writing legend Clive Barker was featured in the Bram Stoker award-winning book, It's Alive, Bringing Your Nightmares to Life, published by Crystal Lake Press. Tim also co-founded the Las Vegas chapter of the prestigious Horror Writers Association, and has held membership in various writers' organizations, including the Writers'Guild of America. Tim's experience working with networks like Comedy Central and Showtime, as well as Hollywood production companies, including Full Moon and Asylum, has allowed him to bring his unique vision to the screen. While Mark is an Australian-born director, producer, writer who sold his first feature, Marauders, to the international market at the age of 24. Since then, he worked on numerous diverse projects ranging from action comedies such as Sensitive New Age Killer to documentaries, including one about Jackie Chan titled Beyond Mr. Nice Guy. Other film credits include Narrow Gauge, Trail of Passion, The Sentimental Assassin, Defenseless, Fertile, Pond Scum, Stress to Kill, Purgatory Road, and Painkiller. Recently, he completed principal photography on 3 more films, Bring Him Back Dead, Hell's Coming For You, and Killcraft. Mark also has extensive distribution experience, having worked for Orion Pictures, Absurda, which is David Lynch's company, and Village Roadshow. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mark and Tim. Take it away.
I'm me or?
Is he good?
I'm good.
Again, I'm sorry.
Okay. Can everybody hear me out there? Put up a hand if you can hear me. Yes? Okay, good.
Yes,
So
yes.
what I was saying was we're going to start off by, I'd like everyone to get a piece of paper and a pen or a marker or a crayon. You are all writers. You should have paper. So grab a piece of paper. I'm going to have you do something right here at the beginning at the top. So let me know when everybody's got it. Everybody's good. I know in this room you can hear me, but they weren't so lucky. All right, folks, here's what I want you to do. I want you right now to give some thought to the one thing you don't want anyone to know about you. The one thing that you're going to take to your grave and I want you to write it down and hide it. I'm not going to ask you to share it, but I want you to write it down. Take a moment, think about that one thing that you don't want anyone to know about you. Write it down. And I'll gauge based on the people in this room. I'll wait until it looks like everyone's pretty much done, but I want them to give it some thought. It's funny they gave us a bio that we talked about ourselves.
Actually, you don't really need to.
I know. But
Redundant.
okay, we pretty good in the room? Yes? Okay, great. So I am Tim Chazmar. This is Mark Savage. It was really great that Michelle read some bios for us. We had some notes we were going to say about who we are to start off, so it's a little redundant. I'll speed over it, but I'm a two-time best-selling author, bestseller. My parents are convicted felons. They met on a bus coming back from prison. My mother served time for stabbing someone, and my father was a drug dealer. So I was the product of convicted parents, convicted felon parents, and grew up on welfare, and there was a lot of craziness and no food and a lot of hard times. But I graduated high school, I graduated college, I moved to California with $1,000 in my pocket, and I didn't have any celebrity contacts, any friends, any connections, and I created a career and a life for myself. We good on audio? Everything's good? Okay, just checking in. So I actually told that story about moving to California and trying to make it in entertainment in the short story that I sold for Chicken Soup for the Soul. And one of the little interesting things, and it applies to you in working in entertainment, adapting a novel in prose into entertainment, is that a lot of the things that I've done to make money or open doors and be successful have looked crazy on paper. And I'm going to give you an example. When I first moved to California, the very first screenplay that I ever wrote was about, this was back in 2005. It was about a black person who goes into NASCAR, and NASCAR is traditionally very white. And it was around the time of Talladega Nights, etc. So we needed, in order to sell this screenplay, an African-American lead. And I didn't have access to get to Chris Rock or Chris Tucker, who was really big at the time. But I landed in Rancho Cucamonga, by the way, so you guys know, because we're all mostly IE folks here. And I see some woo-woo in the back there. SK Murphy, shout out. There was a improv, the world famous improv in Ontario, California. And it just so happened that Eddie Griffin, who is a moderately famous black comedian, was headlining that weekend. So I, who had a screenplay but didn't know what to do, how to get it options sold, anything, I went to the comedy club. I had a cardboard cutout, and on the front of it, I wrote, "Hey Eddie," in black magic marker. And on the other side, "Screenplay for you." And I waited at the back door, and the security, came out and kind of looked at me and, is this guy a nutball? Is he crazy? And I talked to him. I was like, no, just a screenwriter. Just want to sell my script. And, again, this is insane, right? You would never advise someone to do this. So I waited at the back door because I was young and, whatever. And a limo pulled up when he was entering to do his show for the night. It was him with an entourage. And he got out of the limo. And I held up my sign, and it'd say, "Hey, Eddie." And he looked over and he's like, and then I flipped it over, "Screenplay for you." So I'm just standing there, total stranger, cardboard cutout. And he walked over and said, "What do you have?" And we started talking, and he gave me his publicist number to make sure that I was legit and I wasn't nuts. And I called them and I followed up and I did all the due diligence, and I attached him to the script and I optioned it, and that was the first thing I sold in 2005. And I didn't know anything. And I literally stood there with a cardboard cutout. So that's the kind of stuff that I've made a career out of doing. I got into stand-up comedy, and very early on, I realized the producer and the booker had the power, so I started running shows at an early age, and that didn't make a lot of comedians happy because I hadn't earned my dues. I hadn't spent 10 years kicking around some open mic, and I've taken that approach all the way through. The first TV show that I ever sold to the Country Music Channel combined pro wrestling and stand-up comedy, and when I was kicking around that idea at the time, I had 2 comedy mentors, and I promise, by the way, Mark's going to get a chance to talk at some point. Just sit there and look pretty. He has a great accent. Wait till you hear. So I had this idea, and I had these 2 comedy mentors, and I looked up to both of them for stand-up comedy advice and input. And I told the one the idea about combining pro wrestling and stand-up comedy. So like pro wrestling as far as title belts and referees and feuds and fights, and stand-up comedy, jokes and setups and punchlines and tags and all this. Oh, it'd be great. And this was before roast battle or any of that stuff. So it was a very new concept. My comedy guru said, "That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Don't tell anybody about it if you want to work in this industry." And so I kept it to myself for 2 months, and I was like, oh, and I kept thinking in my head, I still think it's a good idea. I still want to try it. So I pitched it to the other comedy guru I had, Gary Cannon, and Gary said, "That's a great idea. Let me call the GM at the Ontario Improv, and I'll get you a night." And so he got me a Tuesday, which became a regular monthly show. And then I was doing shows at the Ontario Improv, the Bray Improv, the Irvine Improv, the Hollywood Improv, the John Lovitz Comedy Club, and it ended up being sold to the Country Music Channel as my first TV show. If I had listened to the first guy who said it was a stupid idea, that would have been it. I run a publishing house. I do comics. I am a film producer. I like to bring people together. I'm like a spider in the middle of a web. I don't have to know everything about everything, but I just have to know people who do. Like Mark will tell you when he finally talks, I don't know anything about the technical aspects of a movie. If you talk to me about aspect ratio or what lens is in the camera, no idea. I don't have to know. I know guys like him. So that's what I like to run around and do. I'm a ghostwriter. I ran the HWA in Las Vegas for 2 years, the Horror Writers Association. The highest, biggest names in the horror industry will tell you that calling your stuff horror makes it very difficult because people have this like adverse reaction to what they think horror is. It's not blood and guts and disgusting stuff. It's that spookiness of dread. It would be better to call it dark fantasy or thriller. People react better to that. Anyway, so I ran that for 2 years. In 2019, I won the National Literature Award in Mexico. I've spoken at the Las Vegas Book Fest and San Diego Comic-Con and WonderCon, Idaho Writers Guild, LA Times. Most importantly, I'm here speaking for you guys. And as far as name dropping, it's the only time I'll do it, but just, so you guys know, hey, this guy knows a thing or two. I've worked with Kevin Smith, James Gunn, Lloyd Kaufman, Adam Sandler, Clive Barker, Netflix, Gabriel Iglesias, brands like Fangoria, Film Threat, First Comics News, Chicken Soup for the Soul, WWE, Full Moon, Jewish Journal, Comedy Central, and now I'll shut up and let my friend talk.
It's a little hard to follow up that act. Although I did pretend to be an alcoholic once to get money from an investor who didn't trust people who didn't drink. And I did get the money. We basically drove around for a day going to commercial establishments. Apparently I was drinking, but I was actually emptying glasses into pot plants, and by the end of the day he was impressed that I held my liquor well, so I got the money from that. So it was interesting that I think there's quite a commonality between book writers and indie filmmakers because we both want our stuff to be seen. We both want to get it publicized. We continually work. We're always looking for new ventures, always looking for new ways to exploit our material, and the ways we do it changes all the time. So my love of what I do now, which is filmmaking, but my love came from my love of books and writing as a very young kid. So that was it. That was my first love. The first love was writing, and it was short stories and a few unpublished novels when I was a kid. But it just sort of in a way like transformed into also like, directing and producing, because I guess like even say a self-published writer or even a writer who these days you've got to do a lot more as a writer than you used to. You've got to do a lot of the publicity yourself too. It doesn't just stop at relying on someone else. Exactly the same with indie film. If you literally put a film in the hands of someone and expect them to do all the work, you'll be very, very disappointed. You have to support it. And I think it's exactly the same with films and books in that way, especially indie, because unless you have a huge publishing company behind you or a huge distributor like a big studio, then you're always going to be in that position where you've got to do it. So I've pretty much shared my passions in the field that I'm in, but I knew from a very early age that I couldn't just be a director. I needed to be a producer as well and a writer, because if I'm just a director, I'm waiting for other people to give me jobs. If I'm a producer, I'm also generating work. So I'm raising money, meeting other people who are also producing, like Tim, and I'm also generating money for scripts that I'm writing. So again, I'm not sending it out to people and hoping they're going to anoint it and saying, we'll get behind this, because it's very, very difficult to get someone to get behind a script. So from a very early period, I not only did the writing and the cinematography and the production, I also was in distribution. So my background is also in that. So I worked for Orion Pictures. You might have seen the little symbol, on movies. Worked for a company called Village Roadshow, which was a fairly big production outfit worldwide. One of their biggest successes was The Matrix. They were behind that. And I worked for a company called Observer, which was filmmaker David Lynch's distribution company, an exhibition company. I did the exhibition on a number of films of Lynch's. Again, I did it because as a filmmaker, I understood that wouldn't it be good if I knew a little bit about distribution before I try to get into the business? I guess a little equivalent to maybe if you're a writer, getting into publishing for a while, or at least sort of like trying to understand how the publishing business works. It helps to know the other side. It helps to know the side that you're going to be dealing with, because then you know the tricks, and you also know how to speak to people, because in each industry, everybody's got a different language. And if you can speak the language of every industry, just like, for example, when I approach an investor, I don't approach them as a creative. I approach them as someone making a deal, financial deal. So I talk to them as like an investor. Then when I meet the creative people, I talk with them. So I work with a number of, I've worked with a number of actors, celebrities in various guises. I also do special features for movies that you might watch on Blu-ray or 4K or your DVD, interviews with actors, and that I've done that all my life. So I keep getting asked to do that as well. So I've worked with people on that, like, Paris Hilton, James Wan, various people who are involved in the business, who are collaborators. So I try to spread myself, not too thin, but at the same time, try to keep a hand in everything, so that I always know what I'm talking about, in a way, a little bit like being the guy on the job site who can cut wood, sling a hammer, bash nails, but also being able to, cut off wood, and also be able to talk to the architect. I think it helps to understand everybody's role if you can. I think you achieve more by being able to empathize with everyone else's role and relate to what they're doing and what their own needs are. And hopefully at the end of all that, everybody's needs can be met, and then you get to make a movie.
Cool. You might want to know, we don't have time for all your applause. I had a lot of notes. You might want to know how Mark and I met. We actually, both of our work was in the Bram Stoker award-winning It's Alive, Bringing Your Nightmares to Life. So it won, what year was that, 2019 maybe? What do you think?
Yeah, 2019 or 18. Yeah.
Yes. It's weird because the work is always the next year's award, so it's kind of hard to. Anyway, we were both in the book, and we were doing a signing at Dark Delicacies in Burbank, and we just struck up a conversation about films that we were interested and influenced by, and it turned out that we had a lot in common. And from there, I watched one of his films, Purgatory Road. I did a review for First Comics News. I loved it. I loved the sensibility. I loved the braveness in creating its own world. And then I was working on a movie, a comedy called The Year of Laughing Dangerously, that was being mishandled, and it was very frustrating to me. And we discussed how he would have done it differently had he been a part from the beginning, and that made me want to work with him. We did a 9/11 short that's in a museum in New York. We did a TV pilot about celebrity psychics. We worked for the Chinese TV network. Network. We did a bunch of projects, and most recently, something we're real excited about is we were able to adapt. There's a gentleman who lives in Las Vegas who had been working on and writing ideas for an action satire thriller that ultimately ended up being called Hell's Coming for You. And we came on board and we were able to work with this gentleman and adapt it into a screenplay, and then ultimately we shot the movie. And you know, as beautiful and sexy as Mark and I both are, it would be nice if just for the fun of it, you were able to hear something from that gentleman, the man who I literally took, you know, his ideas, his notes, his concepts, what he wanted, and turned it into a screenplay and made it into a movie. Ha, well, guess what? He's here right now. His name is Jack Spear. He's sitting right over here. And you guys with that applause again, we don't have time. So his ideas, his notes, his writing. Jack, would you tell us a little something about the process?
Sure. Thanks can you hear me? Are we good? Everybody can hear me on Zoom and everything? Well, first of all, my passion is stand-up comedy. Well, sit-down comedy, because I'm in a mobility scooter. So I am the sit-down comic. And I just, every time I go somewhere, I always try to think of something funny about what I've heard. And Sandy had mentioned filter words, right? So I have some filter words that I find a little offensive. Words like curb, escalator, stand-up guy, doesn't have a leg to stand on. And so I use that in my routine, and it's a good laugh because you know, if you can't laugh at yourself, you know, you got to laugh at everyone else. But the question at hand is my idea for this movie. I always about in 2014, my late wife decided that I should do something other than be retired. So I thought, because I was bugging her, as she said, and I don't imagine how I could do that, but I did. So one of the things that I did was I started to write down some ideas for this concept, this movie that I had thought of doing, or either a movie or a screenplay or a script or whatever it might turn out. I started to do notes for it. And fast forward through the years, I was doing some podcasts, and fortunately, one of the folks that I interviewed was Tim Chazmar, and we just developed a relationship. And one day, I told him about these notes and things that I had been writing, and my idea for this script or this screenplay. And next thing you know, he introduces me to Mark. 3 months later, we're sitting in my garage writing all my notes together into a script. We got it funded, and we got to shoot it. I'm fortunate enough, I got to play the lead actor of this movie. It's called, a little promo thing here. It's called Hell's Coming for You. And I play the character, my character's name is Liam Gunter Hell. And see
Hell's
what I did
coming
there?
for you?
Yes. So we thought, oh, is that a legitimate name? So we looked, we did a little Google research, a little Google search, and found in Germany it's a common last name. Hell is a common last name. So we thought, well, and I wanted to do a shout out to my favorite actor, Liam Neeson. And so we came up with Liam Gunter Hell is my character's name. And I am a disabled bounty hunter, world renowned, and the movie is full of action. And to summarize it all, it took all my crazy ideas that I had written down and I had generated and thought up, and we massaged it into this great script and turned it into a screenplay, and it was absolutely amazing.
Well, Jack, why did you go indie versus trying to sell it to a major studio?
Oh, that's a good question, because when you keep it as an indie, you have control over it. If you give it to a big studio or somebody else, they might decide I'm not the right person for that character, and they may reshoot it and use some handsome guy. I don't know, but yeah, to maintain control over what happens with the movie and all that kind of stuff. So that's a good reason for keeping it indie.
Cool. All right. Is there anything else you want to tell them, Jack?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to say a few words. I look forward to maybe becoming a part of this and doing some more writing. I think it'll be fun.
And that's let's hear it for Jack Spear, huh? All right, you can applaud. All right. Well, and that's the thing. He had all these notes and ideas. It could have been an anthology. It could have been a 3-book set. And so he could have went that route, but instead he decided to turn into a screenplay and shoot the movie. He may still put out the book. We sold it to a distributor. We're actually part of the reason the 3 of us are here, because I was booked to speak. Thank you. And then I said, you know what? Let's get Mark. And then since it was the 2 of us and we have to record audio commentary for the Blu-ray anyway, Jack said, I'll just come down from Vegas. And so the 3 of us, after this and the lunch, we're going to go back to the hotel and record commentary over the movie for the Blu-ray release. So that's like, you know, we're working. And I just want you to, like, he has plans of doing more books and working in that field. You know, it's important to learn the language. We mentioned the language that people use in their industry. I was thinking of how much it bugs me when somebody says they're a writer, and then I ask them about something they're working on, and they say how many pages it is. I'm like, it's word count, words. We get paid per word. If you've ever sold an article or a short story, it is, you get paid per word. I wanted to mention a very quick Tim Burton story just about the I don't want to say fakeness, because I don't want to paint. It's just there are certain things you have to accept when you work in certain industries. And a friend of mine is an art director. He's a 2-time Oscar-winning art director. His name's Jared Poyava. If you look him up, he worked on Ed Wood. I love Ed Wood. I'm very inspired by Ed Wood. And the opening animated sequence has like tentacles and flying saucers and all this stuff. Well, he was the one who put that all together on a miniature set and all this. He hadn't met Tim Burton before, and he was worried that everything you see about Tim Burton, you're all familiar with Tim Burton, right? Beetlejuice, Batman, Edward Scissorhands. So you see him with his crazy hair, and he's like very artsy and very, I'm in the shadows and I am of darkness, and my friend is like a nuts and bolts, like, what are we gonna do? And he's like, oh my God, how am I gonna talk to this guy? And so he's waiting with all the art director guys, and he just wants to talk real craft. And he sees Tim Burton come in with a team of investors, the money men, the people who are putting money in to make this possible. And he's walking around like, oh, and this is, I was inspired by darkness, and that represents the evil of death. And so he's doing this, he's walking around, and my friend's like, oh. And as soon as the investor people leave the room and the door closes, Tim says, all right, guys, let's get down to business. Because in order to do it, you have to be nuts and bolts. But in order to get the money, the image of who Tim Burton is artsy-fartsy. And that's what they're paying for. So he understood that. He knew where the money was coming from. So if he met them as, yeah, I want to make a movie. There's this great director, and that's not the image. The image is, oh, eternal darkness. And that's what they're paying for. That's what they're paying for. So little tips on overall the industry. So I just told that story. Is there anything you want to say about that, about playing the game, shall we say, before?
Yeah, I think the playing the game is as much a part of the craft. You know, that I think initially we all resist the thing about, well, I don't want to be a business person. I don't want to have to do that stuff. But once you get firmly kind of more embedded in whether it's writing, filmmaking or whatever, the game part of it is a very important component of what you're doing. You know, the business side is what's important, you know, because even with writing, you can't just write something and then you just leave it on the computer or you print it out and put it in your closet. You know, you then need to build relationships with people. And I think that's really the number one thing that often have people saying to me, oh, I want to do a really good pitch deck. And they spend weeks doing a pitch deck and weeks doing a presentation. But then I'll say to them, okay, you've got that. Do you have any people that you know who have money or know who published? Oh, no. You know, it's the relationship building where you should be putting most of your effort other than the craft itself. It's a relationship building because that's what's going to help your career the most. Like you can have the prettiest presentation, but if the person doesn't like you, it doesn't matter how pretty your presentation is. They're basically going to kick you to the curb.
When I first moved to Hollywood, California, and I was getting involved in producing, I had a business lunch with Carl Bradley and Buzz Belmondo. Buzz, you might know if you were ever a fan of 80s sitcoms. There was a TV show called Out of This World. He was the wacky neighbor. He was the foreign guy who always dropped in with catchphrases and one-liners. Really great comedian, really funny guy. And Carl Bradley was an NBC executive, and they were really good friends, and I was starting to make some moves, so they invited me to lunch at Cantor's. That's where all business takes place. And so we're at Cantor's Deli, and he hits me with the hard question, me and my writing partner at the time. He says, Tim, at some point in your career, you're going to have to choose between art and money. So what are you going to choose? And he's sitting there staring at me. And I said, well, I think you want me to say art, but I do it for the money. And he laughed and he said, exactly. He said, yes, because people hold on to art and they don't make any money. He said, if you go for the money, you are able to make more art. But if you hold on to your art, then you go broke and you don't have any money. So that's why a lot of times you hear people say, I did one for me, one for them, one for me, one for them. So you do something to make your money and then you do the passion. And then you do something for money and you do the passion. To bring it back to writing for you guys, when you're successful as a writer, you published your books, it never, look at the top of a successful book. It doesn't say best written author. It says best selling author. Because sales isn't a bad thing. That's how you keep your business going. If you're the best book in the world, but you sell one copy, you're not doing so well. I want to say this, that when I first got involved with all the publishing industry, I had done short stories, screenplays, and wrote for magazines. I had never finished a novel. And I love telling this story because it really hammers home certain aspects of what I've learned to hone in my career. I went to a meeting of the HWA, the Horror Writers Association in Los Angeles, and I talked openly about an idea. Did you hear me? An idea for a novel called Soul Trader, about how when you say you'd give up anything to have something you wanted, like your favorite car or whatever, you are now a lead in hell. And so demons get these leads to follow up on in the sales team. So he said he'd give anything to have this car. So I'm going to show up at midnight and tell him, yes, Jonathan, you could have that car. Sign this contract and give me your soul. So it was using the whole concept of selling your soul as a sales team. And there's a salesman in hell who's bored of it and he wants to stay on earth. And so he does a deal with a girl and he swallows the soul. So now he doesn't have to leave because he has a soul in him. And so it gets ridiculous, and there's heaven and hell. And it's an idea. I didn't write it, but I said the idea with such passion and gusto. And I was talking about other projects I did, that at the end of that meeting, I got approached by a woman who ran a traditional publishing house. And she said, she gave me her business card and she said, Tim, I would like to publish that book. That is a great idea, you know, a writer of your caliber, blah, blah, blah. So she gives me her card. Remember, I didn't write it. It was just an idea. And I didn't send a query and I didn't send chapters and I wasn't trying to get it done. So I took her card and that was out of my comfort zone. So I took the card and I said, thank you, I appreciate it. I put the card, I forgot about it, moved on with my life. A few months later, I was at the LA Times Festival of Books. She approached me again. And this is so ridiculous. She said, Tim, can I talk to you for a minute? I was like, yeah. So we went on this little walk and she said, Tim, I was talking to my partners at the publishing house and we realized what we did wrong. A writer like you, we insulted you by offering you a 1-book deal. We would now like to come back and offer you a 3-book deal if you would please publish with us. I didn't write a book yet! Just based on how I am and how I was with people and all this, I sold myself without a query letter, an agent, a sample chapter. It was an idea, people. That's the industry that I know, that I see, that I work in. That's literally what happens. And so that's why, you know, it breaks my little heart when I hear people getting all worked up about stuff that really doesn't matter. You know, it is who you know, right, Mark?
Yeah, it's who you know and the relationships that you build with people. You know, that everything is about making sure that all your relationships are not about what can you do for me, but it's also what can you do for them. Because it doesn't matter what position someone's in. Everybody, they also have needs as well. You know, you go to them and you want something, but you also, by getting to know the person, by speaking to them, you can also understand that they also are in a position where sometimes there's something that they need. And sometimes maybe you can help them with that. So I find often that I very rarely say to someone, I want this. I'll just tell them my current situation where they end up saying, oh, really? I wouldn't mind getting involved in that. It's a lot less pressure and it becomes a more collaborative relationship because it doesn't become so transactional. It's very difficult to have like a truly human relationship when it's entirely transactional. You don't really want that. You want something that's more than transactional. And I think that, as Tim said, like his presentation of Soul Trader was what was able to get their interest, but it's Tim himself that they're really investing in. You know, they're not investing in Mark doing Soul Trader. They're doing Tim doing Soul Trader because they like the personality, they like the charisma, and you know, everybody is going to respond to, you know, someone in a different way. It's all kind of like relative, but yeah, it's really, really important to focus very, very heavily on the benefits of the relationships, because you don't build those up, the writing part, you know, can end up basically you can never find a home because you didn't build the relationship. So you've got to confront, you've got to embrace the business side as well, and not see it as almost kind of like, well, that's not me, I'm not a business person. No, you've got to be somewhat of a business person. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be an accountant, but you've got to look at it as a business, because the people you're going to are people who run businesses.
Yes.
So you can't just act like, well, I'm only the artist. No, they also need to earn a living. They also have people who are pressuring them. Make sure this book makes money or at least breaks even. That's their pressures. So you want to try to, you know, let them know that you're going to work with them to meet some of their needs, and then they can meet your needs.
I have a great example about this. I do coaching for writers, and I had a guy who wrote he's a great comedian. He's worked with David Sedaris a lot, a long form storytelling, and he wrote this amazing book. It's like his third one, and he really wanted to get with one of the top publishers. And so I was able to massage a meeting for him. They read it, they liked it, and they wanted to have lunch with him. And they did. And over lunch, they told him that this is one of the best books we've ever read. And he was happy, thrilled. And then they said, it's just a shame we can't publish it. And he wanted to know why. And the answer they gave him blew his mind and gave he and I conversations for months because he didn't understand it. And we took 9 laps around the idiot tree for me to try to explain this to him. But what the person said was, you don't have enough Twitter followers. The year is 2023. Back then it was a few years ago, but the world is different. They knew that the time and effort they put into marketing and selling his great book when people don't know anything about it was not financially as easy as Snooki has 9 million Twitter followers and she's putting out a tell-all. Overnight, they're going to make all their money. So that's where they go, and those are the decisions they make. But the person who met with him was lamenting, I wish the industry was different. I'm really sorry. I love this book. That's why I wanted to meet with you and tell you that. But he missed out because he didn't spend any time engaging and creating a fan base that already existed. And look, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. You can be angry. I'm just telling you what it is. That's the world that we're in. So you just take that and apply it to, you know, what you're doing. Another guy that I worked with, his dream was to work for a television show as a comedy writer because he was a great stand-up comic and he really wanted that more than anything in the world. And I always try to encourage people to know what your end goal is. What's going to make you truly happy? What is it? Is writing the book? Is doing the screenplay? Is making a movie? Because my friend's dream was to write for a TV show. That's all he wanted. That was his goal. And I was able to make some things happen, and I got him hired for Ellen. We've all heard of Ellen. He was one of the writers for Ellen. He lasted 1 season and then got let go. He was depressed and sad because he worked for it and was fired, and now he was out of work. The season he worked on got nominated for an Emmy and won, and they mailed him his Emmy. So he went through an existential crisis looking at his Emmy, which would say, I'm a good writer, and I'm fired and I'm out of work. So these are the kinds of things you could fall yourself into if you don't know what. You're going to say something, Jack?
If I could, I wanted to add a real-time thing about social media. As you can see, I'm an older guy, and I have no clue about social media. And there's a lot of other folks in the room about my same age. I've recently learned, as Tim had just alluded to, that social media is incredibly helpful. So I kind of decided that, well, maybe I should get in it, because a couple times I was offered to do a project or offered to be part of a project, and the first thing they want to know is, how many followers do you have? Because to them, that adds some sort of credibility or some legitimacy to whoever you are. So I hired a social media manager a few months ago, and I'm nearly to 5,000 followers within about 3 or 4 months. But my point was, to add on to what Tim said, was social media. I didn't believe it for the last 5 or 6 years. I could do this without social media. No, you can't. Whether it's writing, whether it's comedy, whether it's trying to distribute a movie, whatever it is, people are going to look at your social media. Even when you meet somebody, first thing they say is, how can I follow you, or what are your digits, or whatever the terminology is. But I thought it was important, Tim. I just kind of wanted to add a real-time thing to that.
Sure, brother. I appreciate you chiming in. Yeah. To keep yourself motivated in the writing process, are you familiar with Bobcat Goldthwait from the Police Academy movies and stuff like that? You may not know he's a writer-screenwriter. He does tons of movies. He worked for Jimmy Kimmel as a director behind the scenes for a long time. What he does to keep himself motivated is he'll check himself into a hotel, and that's where he works on his screenplay. You might be wondering, why the hotel? Why doesn't he do it in his living room? Well, the reason that he does it is because he's paying for the hotel. So he's not going to sit there and watch TV. He's not going to call his kid. He's going to be working because he's paying to be there every second. So that's what he does to keep himself motivated. As far as motivation goes, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm so full of anecdotes and I'm like, I want to get all this stuff in. I have a dear friend of mine who was motivated by Chelsea Handler's books. Chelsea Handler, the comedian, she wrote all these books about her sex life and some of her adventures. And my friend was a producer and comedian who did a lot of shows at the Ontario Improv. She said, I could do that. I could write this really great book. And so what she did, and you all are writers working in industry, so you'll see why how ridiculous this is. She really did this. She booked a castle in Ireland for a month. And she told me she was going to fly to Ireland in her castle, and that's where she'd be inspired to write the great novel. How does that work out? Right? If you can't write it in your kitchen, then you can't write it in your castle. That's not how it works. It's not about the external. It's not, I'll write this great book if I only had a Corvette. You know, I drive around in my Corvette and I have so many ideas. So anyway, I do want to get into the nuts and bolts of screenwriting, the process itself. But was there anything you wanted to add? Because I talk a lot.
I don't think I can add to that, but I can add to the next part.
Excellent.
Okay.
Nuts and bolts of screenwriting. So the basics, every screenplay has a 3-act structure. That's the bare bones. First act, we're setting up who are these people, then what is the problem, what is the resolution. Anything from Star Wars to Cinderella, everything falls into that structure. There is no movie you're going to watch that is everything's great and wonderful, the end. That either has to be something that's going on. It could be as hard as the world is coming to an end, or it can be she needs a date for the dance. Whatever it is, it falls within that basic structure. There's a hero's journey, just like in a novel, antagonist, protagonist. But the thing is, in a screenplay, you don't sweat the small, you don't sweat the big details. A novel is so much more deep on inner monologue and details because you're the only one telling the story. This is your story and you work with an editor. But when you do a screenplay, it's a collaborative medium. It's art by committee. There's going to be this whole team involved. So when we write the screenplay scene of this, it's Mark sitting at a table, Tim sitting at a table, daytime at the library. He says, I says, he says, I says, Michelle says, next scene, we're in the bathroom.
And I should also add that what you're doing in the screenplay, as opposed to, say, like a novel or a short story, is that a screenplay is more externalized. It's more the external life of the character. Whereas, for example, I always say to people, if you really want to know how someone else lives or someone else's life, the best thing to do is to read a novel or a short story, because you're getting their internal world. The screenplay is more about the external world, and you will still work towards making, some internal world, but the nature of the screenplay is that you're pretty much writing about what you see. You don't write in the screenplay, a stream of conscious about what someone is thinking.
The smells,
yeah,
it's what you see right there. Yeah. So very dialogue heavy, very where are they, what's going on, even things like fabric and outfits. You have a costume designer in a movie, so all these things get outsourced to these other people who are going to put their 2 cents in. It is a blueprint. A screenplay is a framework for something that's going to be chopped up and added and changed anyway. So it's just the framework.
Yeah, like in a sense, what's lacking in the description in a screenplay, like for example, as Tim just said, like the fabric, the smell, the texture. In the novel, you're doing all of that. Whereas in the screenplay, it suggests it And then the director and producer will bring in the people who bring that. The production designer, your director will have, like, for example, I'm making a movie. I'll talk to the production designer about, this is the kind of color of the room I'd like. I'm looking at these kind of drapes. I like this kind of carpet. I want the colors to be like that. Because that's not in the screenplay. And as a director, you're sort of almost being slightly interpretive. If you've written it yourself, which I mostly do I mostly do films from my own screenplays, but often I work with other screenplays. So then you're bringing in people that are helping you to almost fill in those details that are that are in the novel, but they're not in the screenplay. So that's why you'll have very differently interpreted works. Like 5 different directors could make the same screenplay, but it could look 100% different each time.
And that's certainly to be said for the cast. What if you write a book with a strong, white male lead, and then when it goes to becoming a movie, it's a black trans person? Entirely different perspective, entirely different. But in adjusting it to a movie, they make changes like that about what's current and, what's going on and how is it going to sell and all this kind of stuff. China is a huge market for being able to sell products, and they will literally recut movies because certain things won't play to the Chinese audience. They'll do various cuts and scenes because this is what's going to go into the Chinese version versus the American version.
It's almost like it's having a cultural adaptation, because the adaptation part is what's really interesting, because the adaptation affects so many areas, which is often why someone will say, oh, I really liked the book, but God, the movie was terrible. Like I hated that movie. Well, that's because a lot of the time, the number one, as we talked about, the novel's very internal. So a lot of stuff gets thrown out because, as someone adapting a novel starts going, how do I physicalize a lot of the internal stuff that's in here? The stuff that's actually in the head of the writer, but how do I physicalize that for the screen? And that's often where things change considerably, that you'll say, well, I really liked the novel, saw the movie, very disappointed in the movie. Well, that's because the movie you saw, the movie that you already saw in your head was a movie that you saw while reading the book. Whereas when you then see someone else's version of the book, you sort of go, what the hell happened here? Like, this was because you've already seen it visually. That's the whole point. A good writer has already helped you visualize it. But that's, to me, the brilliance of the novel, is that it allows every person to have a different interpretation of what it looks like. Whereas when you see a movie of it, it's very absolute. It's like, it doesn't have flexibility. It's like, here it is. It's an absolute. And when you deal with an absolute, it can be very frustrating, because, it's like someone saying, well, here's the novel, 4 + 4 = 9. And you want to say, well, no, it's usually 8. No, in this case, it's 9. And then you've got to live with that, because that's your absolute, is the movie. It exists. The actors are there, the costumes, the music. It doesn't have the ability to be interpreted. Whereas when you read it, or you give it to a friend to read, the friend starts seeing it even differently. I thought you said this novel was great. I didn't like it.
Right.
It's got that wonderful aspect of it that it's interpretive, whereas a movie's not in the same way.
And it's fun to relive memories. I don't know about you. When I read, one of the beautiful things about a book, if it talks about these 2 people climb into a cave, I'm thinking about any cave I've ever been to. How many different caves are there? They're out on the ocean. Well, when was the last time you were at the ocean? And, what was it like for you? Or they go to an amusement park, and I'm thinking about amusement parks I went to as a kid. And so when it's a movie, the people involved, the producer, the director, they decide what amusement park it is.
Yes.
So we're shooting it here, and that's what it looks like. And you're thinking, well, that's not the one that I went to.
Exactly, and that's definitely the main frustration. And I mean, on top of that, you're also dealing with issues of length. Someone's written a novel, and the novel, if played out per the novel, it might be 5-6 hours. Then you end up seeing the movie, it's like 90 minutes. The certain elements have been distilled down. But again, sometimes you'll find that you don't like the elements that got distilled down, because there's stuff missing that you really like.
Sure.
And again, there's no guarantee that any novel, rarely is any novel to everybody's liking when it becomes a movie. Some like it, some don't.
Yeah.
And so it's very much going to depend on what particular attitude was brought to the adaptation. Was it just being made because, hey, that writer's popular, someone happened to get the rights and they made a movie? Or is it really being made as a labor of love? Someone who's, attached, bought, maybe optioned the book like 20 years ago and worked for 20 years to get it right. Even though, again, right is ambiguous. That's their version of right. Them thinking, well, this is really going to be the right way to do it. In a sense, no. I mean, it's always going to be a subjective thing as to what's right. But with some adaptations, I think you still do manage to at least do something that the people who like the novel generally agree it's a pretty good filmization of the essence of what made the novel really powerful.
Well, we're gonna get to some examples of that in a second, but before I do, as far as the programs, I use Final Draft. That's what I use for screenwriting. Mark uses a different one called Fade In.
Fade In, yeah, which is very similar to Final Draft. Yeah, I mean, at least those particular the good thing about the screenwriting software is that it formats it for you. You know what I mean? So if you sort of say, well, I'd like to try a screenplay, but I don't know exactly how to set things out. No, you get Final Draft or Fade In, and very fast learning curve. Within half an hour, you'll understand, because it's literally just using a tab that takes you to the center. That's dialogue. Hit enter twice and it takes you down to the area where you'll put in EXT or ENT for exterior or interior. So yeah, the software is highly recommended, because sometimes people say to me, oh no, I use Word. I mean, there's no reason to use something like Word, because especially when you want to do adjustments, the adjustments are a nightmare, because it's just not made to be adjusted in the same way that a screenplay is, and it starts moving things around that you spend so much more time. Small investment in a Final Fade In is actually a smaller investment. Final Draft's a little bit more, but overall, both great investments if you're going to do a screenplay.
And they both work great with the repetition. When you're doing a screenplay, you have the same characters talking again and again and again. So instead of writing them out all the time, you put, like, if Mark was a character in my story, I don't have to write out Mark Savage. I put M, and it gives me the option. You want Mark Savage? Yes, I do. Moving on. So that way it can be Mark Tim, Mark Tim, Mark Tim, Mark Tim. You can just get it out of your head. So same with locations. If things that are happening at the coffee shop, we put the coffee shop in one time, and now it's going to suggest that every time I go to the scene, do you want to go back to the coffee shop? Yes, I do. So it'll do that for you and help keep things trucking along faster. Examples of somebody else's adaptations and kind of the things to deal with. Stephen King. We all know Stephen King. Good adaptations of his work would be examples like Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, Misery, and that's for awards and IMDb scores and Rotten Tomatoes. Bad examples, same author, same writing, would be Hearts in Atlantis, or the Dark Tower movie that came out and it was a huge bomb. But then it gets more detailed and nuanced, because you have things like his movie The Shining, critical success. Everyone loves Kubrick. King hates it, says it's nothing like his novel, has been speaking out about it for years. So then what do you say about the whole success or failure? Well, the movie made money, everybody loves the movie, but the author says it didn't look like my book. So how would you like it if your book was adapted into a movie? Everyone loves a movie, but it doesn't look like the book you wrote.
Well, that's when you sort of, I guess, some writers get to a point where they actually say, I wrote the book, nothing changes that. Whatever happens with the movie, the book still exists. And I had a very good friend, he's dead now, unfortunately, named Terry Wright, who wrote ghost stories, and he often says to me, one of his books was a book called A Manhattan Ghost Story, which got optioned years ago for something like the selling price was like $2 million, and it never got made. And Terry used to always say to me, I made more money on that than my entire career on everything else I did. So he goes, and it never got made. And people say, you must be very depressed that it never got made. He said, no, I'm not depressed that I got $2 million for A Manhattan Ghost Story.
That's Pat Jankiewicz, our good friend. He has stories like that with his brother, who options all this stuff, makes tons of money, but nothing ever comes out. Yeah. It's the craziest thing. You meet somebody who's like, oh, you're a successful screenwriter. Oh, what can I see? Nothing. Yes. Not a thing. That's the kind of business we work in.
Because also what happens in those situations is that often someone will keep renewing options. You know what I mean? So you first get the option, and then after 3 years, because there's still someone out there who still believe in the project, they're just having trouble getting it up, so they keep renewing options. So you keep getting paid the option fees, which is wonderful. And sometimes technically you could end up making more than actually selling it, because if you've got 10 option renewals, that could end up being like, if the option is 20% of the price, which it sometimes is, other times it's 5%, it depends. But eventually there's probably a point when you go, I don't really care whether it gets made or not, because I'm just happy to get options. They just keep optioning my books.
Yeah. One of my favorite books of all time is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which has been in publication forever. Entire college classes are taught about this. I love Robert Pirsig. He's my favorite philosopher. But Robert Redford has been trying to buy the rights to make the movie, and he would never let it go. Never. He even wrote about it in his follow-up book, Lila, which is amazing. And you read that, yes?
It's great.
A good man recommended that you read it.
Yes, he did.
He did. It's amazing, because if you know anything about Zen, I'll get off my soapbox in a second, but Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a story with a little bit of philosophy in it, a little bit of metaphysics. But he then wrote a follow-up called Lila, which people like me love it because it's a book of metaphysics and deep thinking with a little bit of story. But you know how people are, and you know, people are like, oh, that book, it's hard to, yeah, you're supposed to read 2 sentences, put it down and think, what does this mean about my life? Yes, that's what it's all about. So anyway, Robert Redford's been trying to buy the rights to Zen, and he wouldn't let it go, and he just passed away a few years ago, so now it looks like it's finally going to get made, but he held on to it because he didn't want anyone to do it the wrong way. Talking about Stephen King, they've done 2 adaptations of It. I don't know how well you guys are familiar with the novel of It. I want to see the turtle. Why can't I see the turtle? It's supposed to be the evil clown and the turtle. They've done 2 adaptations. Nobody gives me a turtle. No turtles. As far as I was talking about The Shining and how it's like a successful movie, but not a successful adaptation of the book, The Lawnmower Man. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but they had a rights to a book called Cyber God, which was about virtual reality, and they had the rights to a Stephen King short story called The Lawnmower Man. So they said, just put it together. And Stephen King went to see it, and he told the director, it's on the commentary and stuff, I loved your movie, but it's not my book. I'm going to sue you.
Not at all.
And he did, and he sued him consistently because they kept doing things like, okay, we'll take your name off it when we say that the movie's coming out. And then his name's on the DVD. Oh, wow, slip up in accounting there. And so he had to keep suing him again and again. But again, successful movie, made money. It's not based on the book. So how would you feel if somebody took something you wrote and put an element of it? You write a book about somebody who owns a candy shop. And so they put a scene in the movie about somebody owning a candy shop, but the whole movie's about gang riots. And you're like, what? What happened to my candy shop story? That's the kind of stuff that could happen. So, you know, would you?
It's very common actually, because often a producer, there's all different types of levels of producers and also just different agendas within producers and ethics. You know, you have the producers who are very, very dedicated to like taking good books and doing good adaptations. And, you know, they really care about, you know, bringing some sort of authenticity to the work. But you also have some who literally just troll the publishers or find out what's almost about to be published, just snapping up rights because they just want to buy what's called, you know, the IPO, which is basically just the properties. And these people often could care less about the work itself because they just see that, oh, everyone's familiar with the name of that book. It's a bestseller. So they just want to get anything out there as fast as possible. So people just go, oh, that movie's out. And it's irrelevant to them whether it's good or not. And unfortunately, that's probably more the majority. So that's why it's quite a rare thing to meet a producer who really cares and also who reads. I mean, it's hard enough to even get people to even read a screenplay. I mean, I've literally been on the set of some of my own films, and one of the other producers on the film, because I'm usually producing with other producers as well. And I remember at one point someone said to me, I'm sort of a bit confused about like why this person is doing that now. Like, why would he be doing that? And I said, well, he said, because I don't ever remember that being a thing. And I said, well, it's in the screenplay. Oh, I didn't read it. What? So you agreed to be involved in the movie. You're telling me I don't remember that being a thing? Like, well, of course you don't. You never read it. But the worst part, there was not even any shame there in admitting that he hadn't read the screenplay. It was just like, oh, well, I never read it. It's like saying a doctor, well, I'm going to operate on you, but I never went to medical school. But I'll do it anyway. You know, it was...
I bought this stethoscope. I'm good enough.
Yeah, it's just, it's a lot more common than you think. And that's often why you've probably all heard the word coverage, right? That a studio would do what's called coverage on screenplays, which it means that they get readers, and it's often younger people, to like read and do a synopsis of a screenplay. And often this saves them actually reading it. So they're then basing whether they're going to green light something or not on coverage, on someone's, you know, like often it's just like maybe like, you know, a 20-year-old intern's summary of the screenplay and then deciding from that whether it has merit or not. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that a 20-year-old can't write, you know, a good synopsis, but if it's something you really care about, you'd probably take a read yourself as well, rather than just dismissing it. I mean, think of also what an insult that is to the writer. You know, like, I'm not going to, same with a novel. Like, it'd be, how would you feel if someone is just reading synopsises of your novel and just going, don't like it, without even reading it? Because the whole point of writing is it's how it's written. Every subject is interesting based on how it would be approached. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's no boring subject. It's more the way the writer can interpret the material. Like, you can find someone who can make something very boring, or you can find someone who can make something really, really interesting. So the idea of dismissing someone just based on coverage is an absolute insult, and it shows no desire to even want to get to know the work itself. And the voice, there's no voice in a synopsis.
Have you, I posted a meme the other day, social media word, meme, about writing. You know, I've said this before on panels, and some people get mad at me when we live in an era where people don't like the truth. But here are some statistics for you guys. 33% of high school graduates never read another book the rest of their lives. 42% of college graduates never read another book after college. 57% of new books are not read to completion. So people start it and they put it aside. 70% of US adults have not read a book in the last 5 years. 80% of US families did not buy a book to read last year. So, I mean, this is what we're dealing with. So I openly say that on panels where I'm like, I don't think anybody, people who buy my books, by the way, I have books over here. They'll be for sale at the end. So you don't want to be one of those people. But people will buy my books, and I think it's like a collectible thing of having met me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I sign it, I give it to them, they go home and they squash bugs with it or something. They just put it on a shelf somewhere. I don't think anybody reads it because nobody says anything. Nobody says, I really love that one chapter about nobody, nothing. It's very rare that you get reviews and follow up, and people just don't.
Well, as you well know, that even with films, it's the same thing. You can finish a movie. Okay, so you finished the movie. You've worked on it for a year, and you send it to a distributor. So their first question is, "Oh, do you have artwork?" Yes, here's the art. Okay, look at the art. What about a trailer? So because a trailer is, a minute and a half, that's all they look at. It's very common. They won't watch the movie at all. They're literally just watching the minute and a half trailer and deciding whether they like your movie based on that. So you'll actually sometimes get feedback, it really wasn't for them. So what they're saying, that the artwork and the 1.5 minute trailer wasn't for them. Well, they might as well read the back of your book. If you had like a proxy version of your book, send them rather than a manuscript. You just send them what would be written on the back as a synopsis or as a marketing tool on the back of your manuscript, and they'd just read that and go, not for us. Not for our list. I remember years ago that was often the terminology when they rejected like a manuscript. It's not appropriate for our list. And often you really did get the sense that they don't always read, or definitely distributors who are in the business of distributing movies do not want to watch full movies. But they want to fast forward or just watch the trailer.
And I do want to say, we're not like bitter. Like, we love what we do, by the way, and we wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy our business. Right. We're just trying to tell you what we put up with, but there's a lot of great things in the business and the journey of adapting your work. We would just say that maybe it's good for you to keep control or know what your limits are for what you're willing to let go of. So it doesn't surprise you later. So we don't mean to be negative. It's just, these are things we've had to deal with and currently exist in the industry. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about people not wanting to watch the movie that you did, back in the day when you were selling a movie, particularly if it didn't have giant names attached, right? It would be different if you had Johnny Depp or Brad Pitt. That's a different ballgame. But if you have something without any major names, and nobody is a major name when they start off, it takes time to establish who you are. But they used to fast forward your movie to the first nudity. They wanted to know, how long does somebody have to sit through this movie until there's a naked person? Yeah. And nowadays, because of the model has changed and the most money for independent film is on, there's AVOD, SVOD, and TVOD, which is VOD is video on demand. That's all the streaming services. TVOD is transactional. That's where you pay to watch it. SVOD is subscription model like Hulu, Netflix. And then there's AVOD. AVOD is advertising, video on demand. Well, the most money for indie people who don't have names is AVOD. Advertisers don't want to run an ad for their stuff right after or near your nudity. So it's the opposite. Now they fast forward to make sure there's no nudity. And if they see nudity, they'll reject your film. Recently, a project that I was working on got rejected from a distribution company because there was nudity in the film. Not gratuitous, not crazy, but a little bit of nudity. And and so they rejected it. And they didn't say why. They wouldn't tell us. But luckily, we had some contacts who knew them, and they were able to find out why. Oh, because you had some nudity. Well, why did you ask us to take it out? That could have been an option. So once we found that out, we were able to go back and say, oh, I guess we'll just cut these 2 minutes out of the movie, big whooping deal. And then we were able to solidify distribution. That's the kind of stuff that we have to put up with.
Yeah, I think when any of you are presented with the idea of someone saying, I want to option your short story or a novel, I think one of my first pieces of advice would be to first find out from them, what have they made before? And you definitely don't want to have someone, well, this is one of our first things. No, don't go with someone like that, because your work is too important to go with a first timer with that. Don't do it. My advice would be, if someone says, we're very interested in optioning, so you then say to them, what other books have you optioned before? Find out what other films they've made and watch those films. Don't listen to any BS about well, we've got a lot of money and we're about to, get involved. This is one of our first projects. Let someone else go with the first project. Don't do that with your book. Go with someone so you can watch something they've done and go, I like that. They did a good job. Look at the names of the people who are involved in producing. If there are 10 producers, and there often are, try to find the one who really produced it. And usually can do that, because very close to the director's credit will be a producer of produced by. That's usually the person who really produced it. The other names could be people who just put money in, or literally just knew someone, or was the executive producer's son or wife or mistress or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
hairdresser.
So you've really got to find out who's a real producer, what else have they done, and if possible, if you could even get in contact with someone else who got adapted, whose book got adapted, and you can somehow reach that writer, ask them what was the experience like, because you don't want to be screwed around for years with these people. And also I would also advise to not take out an option that's too long, because it ties it up for too long. You want to be able to have something that give them a little bit of time to get it right. Otherwise they can re-option, or you can go somewhere else with it. You don't want to tie it up for so long that you go, in this time that it's taken, I could have done this or I could have done that with it. It's very important. It's your writing. It's your identity. It's really important. This is why, you're writers. This is why we're writers, because we love words. We can't live without writing. That's the whole point. Writing, because that's how I've always felt.
If you're doing it right, because that's one of the things I get heated on writers panels, the concept of writer's block. Screw you, this is a business. Does a plumber get plumber's block? Does a cop get cop's block? If this is your job, sit your ass down and write. That's what we do. Don't say I'm not inspired by rose petals on a waterfall. Shut up. This is a business. Write the words. Just do it. I wanted to mention that this industry is full of, when it comes to entertainment, there's a saying about, it's so important to be authentic and true. And when you can fake that, you've got it made. So that's why you have to check and confirm and double check and make sure that what they're saying is right, because they'll throw sparkle dust in your face and, hey guy, look over there. And people do, because they assume that they're a decent human being, like I'm hoping all of you guys are, but they're not. They're out for their own incentives and what they want. So don't take anyone at their word. Nobody wears a sign that says I'm a jerk. You have to find out the hard way. Mark has a wonderful story about adapting some novels, Richard Lehman and Ray Garton. I want to make sure we got to that.
The Lehman one was a novel called The Woods Are Dark, and interesting, Lehman is a very, very, not as well known now, probably because his books are mostly got much heavier promotion in Europe and in the UK, but a lot of horror novels. And I went through a process of adapting one of his books called The Woods Are Dark, which was a very interesting process. On that one, we didn't have any, there was no interaction with the writer because he had died. But it was interesting, the option process was that the agent who represented Lehman was in Denmark, of all places. And so the process was like a little bit back and forth thing, but not too much interference on the way it was being written. Because generally when you're optioning, you know, unless there's a clause in the contract where the publisher is going to have a lot of say over like where it goes, and usually you don't want that as a producer, you don't want that because the publisher also is not the writer. You know, I mean, especially if the writer is a late writer. You know, so that. But I'd probably better focus on a book called Live Girls, which is written by I don't know if any of you are aware of it, Ray Garton. He's a very well-established horror writer, liked by writers like Stephen King, etc. That was an interesting process because they had not only optioned his book, they had completely bought his book out, which is a bit of a strange thing to do. And I think even Ray himself probably ultimately maybe wouldn't have thought it was the ideal thing to do. But yeah, so meaning that they bought it out forever.
That's it.
So that's
one
it.
Cash
So-
lump sum, and that's it.
Yeah, so it was an interesting process. So I did the adaptation because I'd loved the novel, and so someone had come to me and said, "We know you really like the novel. Can you do an adaptation of that?" And the adaptation was kind of interesting because I had a producer who'd done the optioning, but the producer's idea of what the book would be was so different. The producer's idea, he was coming more from the idea of a blockbuster mentality. But the problem is that like I know that a lot of his favourite films were like Jerry Bruckheimer action films and things like that. So they weren't so much those kind of horror films. So then when I was writing the adaptation, what was clashing is that he kept trying to bring it back to a blockbuster, but the work itself is not a blockbuster style storyline. I mean, it's a very intimate story about vampires in a strip club. You know, the vampires are the strippers who...
It already sounds like a
The
masterpiece.
strippers who really become vampires. And so it was an interesting process that ultimately went through about 8 drafts. Still isn't made. Like I got paid for writing it, but still hasn't gotten made. And my feeling is it may not get made because I think there's too much like conflict, I think, between like the producer who optioned it and the idea of what it really should be. Because ultimately I think what he wanted it to be was taking it much too far away from what the novel was. And that was the hardest thing for me. And then when I finally met Ray, because I had no connection with Ray, because at the time the producer was telling me, oh no, the producer, the writer doesn't want anyone to talk to him. But that actually wasn't the case. So when I finally did meet Ray years later and told Ray I'd been working on it, he said, oh, well, that's great. I'm glad you were working on it. I had no idea that anyone had actually started adapting it. And I just explained to him how frustrating it was. And I definitely found out that it would have been great to collaborate with Ray, you know, because that would have been my ideal thing, to actually be in communication with Ray while I was doing the adaptation. I would have been absolutely fine with that because myself, you know, I really love writers, respect writers, I'm a writer myself. So the idea to me of shutting out the writer is insane. I mean, unless the writer's a psycho. And Ray clearly isn't a psycho. So unless the writer's a psycho, the idea of actually bringing the writer in on the process, I think is a fantastic thing to do because they wrote the damn thing.
Speaking of writing the damn thing, I just got to notice that we had 10 minutes to wrap it up, and that was, I don't know, maybe 4 minutes ago. So I just want to show you guys, I got so much more I want to say. I've got all these note cards and all these concepts, and all these anecdotes and all these stories.
You can come back.
What's that?
You can come back.
That's what you said last time, and it took 2 years. I got things I want to talk about. Plus, we didn't take any questions from our giant security surveillance cameras over here. How are things in Sector 7? Okay, but I do want to touch on these 2 things, and then maybe we have time for a question or 2. I asked you all to write down the one thing at the beginning of this. That was because that thing that you want to take with you to your grave is the thing that you have the most emotion about, and so it should be influenced, it should be inspiring your art. There should be an element of whatever that is in what you're creating, in what you're writing. So think about that, because that's what you have the most strong emotion towards. Don't bottle that up and hide that, but use that through your characters and through your story. And then, you know, Mark and I have this amazing tip for writing really good suspense. We'll tell you next time. So, any questions?
Yes, actually, we do have questions. The first question was from Karen, and she wants me to ask it. She wanted to know what you thought an appropriate length of time would be for an option.
Okay, I would, once you've done a little bit of due diligence on who the person is who's optioning, and if the person does have some true bona fides in terms of they have made movies, decent movies, and they don't necessarily have to be huge budget movies, but at least movies that you're able to watch and go, well-made movie, looks like they didn't cut it up and turn it into a nightmare. I would say on something like that, yeah, I think initially no more than a 2-year option initially, and I'd go with like maybe initially like a 1-year option. Also depends on how much they're paying, because sometimes people will say, well, we want to give you like $1,000 or $2,000. Well, in that case, then say, fine, you've got the option for 3 months. You know, do it like that. And make sure that in the paperwork that the option just doesn't automatically roll over because you didn't give them 30 days notice that it's going to. You know, make sure that it's very tightly that you are the only one who can extend the option. It's a really important point. Don't have it, because often the standard options, because this is usually the answer. Oh yeah, well that's standard. Well, what they're saying that our standard agreement rips you off.
Yeah.
So you don't want to go with their standard. So make sure that any option, you can on the, like literally right up to the second last day of the option, you can exercise whether it's re-optioned or whether you take the option away.
And that's what I was going to say too, is the money. Anybody that I coach, that I work with, there was a woman who wrote a book about an abusive boyfriend or husband who took her kids and ran to Greece, and she wrote a book about the process of getting her kids back, and it took years. And anyway, that was optioned, and it went to a channel, I think it was Lifetime, something like that. But the process for that had all these other people who were putting their heads in, and I had her focus on the money, because the odds are that, you know, it's not going to get done up to your standards and proper. So at the bare minimum, get some money for this. So I was focused on the money in that aspect, unless I know the people.
You should definitely get, like someone who just says, we want to option it for like $1 and acting like, because we've done this, this and this, I wouldn't go with that.
Oh, you'll get so much on the back end.
Yeah, forget it. Forget it. Get something that's decent, and you know, and when I say decent, at least like $1,000, $2,000 in just a short period. I wouldn't accept too little, because this is the foundation of the work, and people underestimate the value of that when they like to, you know, in a way disenfranchise writers, is somehow, oh, well, you're just a writer. No, that's like saying to an architect, like, you're just the architect. Well, nothing hangs from anything on a building unless the architect basically builds a frame and engineers where the location is. You are the engineer of where the project is planted. That is worth something.
There's a reason they didn't come up with that idea. Your book, your novel,
Yes.
your characters, your story, that's you, that's yours, that's your life, that's what you're influenced by. That's yours, that's your intellectual property. Otherwise, they could just run away and do something, oh, it's similar to it. It's not my project. It's not. Okay, more questions?
Let's check with people in the room first. Anyone in the room have any questions for Tim or for Mark? Guys, it's been so complete, or are you just all traumatized?
I had so much more to say.
Oh,
You talked about having a video on demand transaction, subscription, and then the other type, which is the last one.
Indie?
AVOD.
Indie, I guess. Yeah. Talk about which one gets the most money.
AVOD. These days, AVOD gets the most money. Now, that's if you're not working with celebrities. There was a movie that just recently came out. What's her name? Allie. Remember that TV show Glow? Who was the star of that? Allie something? Allie. Nobody watched it? Big hit on Netflix, like six seasons. All right, whatever. Some movie came out, and James Franco's brother directed it. They had a ton of money, ton of opportunity, and because they're stars, they were in a different position. If we work directly, what I'm trying to say is, if you don't have any connections, advertising video on demand is the best way to go to make the most money. We just signed a deal for Hell's Coming for You, and we could make, anyway, there's a lot of money in AVOD, a lot of money in AVOD, a lot of money. And so, so there's that. But if you have a direct connection with Netflix, one of the people, it's on my notes, I don't have a chance to talk about it now, but I did this thing with Netflix, and her name is Nate. If you look it up, I helped negotiate this special, but Tim over here, although I've done some stuff, I could not do what one phone call to Amy Poehler did. Amy Poehler from Saturday Night Live is the executive producer on the Netflix special Nate, and now it has a TV show coming out. All I could do was introduce them, and then Amy was able to make it happen. So it really comes down to that person's connections. Like, I have some connections, I know this guy, but somebody like that was able to get it on Netflix.
And just to give you an example of what AVOD is, if you want to see something that you go, this is AVOD, there's a streamer called Tubi TV, so TUBI.TV.com. That's AVOD. So it just means that the movie or the TV show is being interrupted by commercials. And so the market's moved in this way, and it's not necessarily a good thing, I don't think. I mean, it's good for that, but I don't like the fact that people are getting in this mentality of not wanting to pay for it. Because you also don't want that with books where Amazon will say, give you, oh yeah, this is in the free part, you know what I mean? And so again, it gets people away from the idea of paying for something, because they're used to paying for it as a large chunk like Netflix, but for that you get like 5,000 movies, whereas back in the days of VHS cassettes, you'd go and pay $5 to rent a movie. And that's where it was a lot more lucrative for everybody, because there's some value attached to it. It's like paying $5 for a book as opposed to going on some giant book or some giant book streamer where they go $5 a month, and then each author gets like 0.005 cents for their book. I mean, that's how the industry has changed. And it's not good.
Plus Netflix, I don't know if you know this, first off, all these guys create their own content now, right? So you have to know them and have the connection to pitch your idea for them to get behind to fund it. But if they buy your thing, if Mark and I do a movie and it's so great that Netflix wants it, do you have any idea what the deal is like? You have a 3-year deal. You don't make any money until a year and 3 months after it's been playing. You get zero upfront because they're Netflix. So our movie plays for a year and 3 months before we get the first 1/3 of the money. And then at the end of the next year, the second 1/3, and then the third year, the final bit of money, and then they decide if they want to renew it or not.
Yeah, and
that's how it works.
And to extend that point, which is why often when you're actually, and I know it's the same in publishing, often people get very blinded by the big publisher who's going to do their book, but often it's a big publisher who they end up making no money from, because the big publisher has got amazing, they've got their accounting methods and their expenses, and they expense you out the door. And so often now, I mean, I'm at a point now where I've done enough movies and enough experience to often go, I'm no longer impressed by the idea that this studio or this streamer is interested. No, I'll go with a company where we get the most revenue back. Because as we all know, we've got to do a lot of our own marketing anyway. So, and even when you go with like an established company, they still don't do near as much marketing. I mean, the amount of friends I have who write books and complain about the little amount of publicity that the publisher actually did when their book came out. Half the time that they would even have signings in bookstores that the publisher forgot to even bring the books to actually be signed. Things like that. It's quite common. And so it's the same with movies. So now I'm in a position, you're much better to look at, with every deal, look at when do the expenses cut in, how much do you really get back, and when do you get it? Do you get it back on first dollar that comes in, or do you get it after they've made their first $20,000 investment in the book or whatever? So it's really, really important to look at those details, because as I said, the standard contract is the contract that screws you. So that's what they're sending you. They're sending you the contract that screws you. And I don't mean in an illegal way. No, they do it legally, but you end up being screwed, and you go, gee, I'm with this great publisher, but I've seen no money. I'm seeing nothing. Whereas often when you go with a more unknown publisher who are more embracing of their writers, they give you a much better deal. It just means often you've got to work a little harder to push it. Well, the way I look at it, well, that's fine, because that's kind of part of being a writer or a filmmaker is anyway. It's all part of it these days. You've got to also be a marketer of yourself. It's really important.
We do have one other in the chat. It said, I'd like to know what else Tim has on those note cards.
Right? A lot.
Credit Mary with that one.
The next issue of Straight Jackets is just all my notes. Nothing but my notes.
Is there anybody on chat who would still like to ask a question? Raise your hand, wave at me or something so we can see you if there's anybody. If not, we're going to launch into their wrap up here. Okay, take it away, guys.
Well, we're wrapped up. I've got notes and notes and notes of stuff to talk about. So our fun, zany little end was the suspense joke. So that's what we got. That's it. We got nothing else. I got all this stuff that I love. Thank you for letting us come. Thank you for letting us be a part of this. As I said before, I'm always happy to talk about whatever topic you say that the group would learn from. And I'm very multifaceted. I do lots of stuffs. So I'm happy to do something. And like I said, I landed in Rancho Cucamonga. So a part of me will always really appreciate this corner of the world. So I'm always happy to come back or help out or send people to you. I'll promote and send a link as well. I've got books to sell and things to talk about. So I look forward to lunch. And that's it for me.
And look, I've absolutely enjoyed immensely being in the company of writers, because I love writers. Writers are great.
They're good people.
And so, yeah, my advice always, and it goes for myself as well, of you guys, yeah, protect your babies, because that's what your writing is. It's your babies. And when you send that out into the world, it's the equivalent of having a child and making sure they get well educated and that they either marry well, or they meet nice people who they can be with for the rest of their life. If they have a supportive network of family, that's how you want your writing to be treated. Treat your writing as you would treat your best friend or your beloved mother or father. Treat it with that kind of respect and give it that kind of advice. That's why don't just let people come along and go, oh, here's a cent, but we made Transformers. No, don't be blinded by that, because that's not in your best interest. Do what's in your best interest for your child and think of your work as that.
Very good. Thank you for all the great tips. Howard, you're up.
Okay, well, Michelle, I'm going to throw it back to you. Can you give us a little idea of what's coming next month?
Well, Howard, excuse me, I just put a thing in. I cannot see the name of Mark's DVD. Is it a DVD? Because it's not clear on Zoom. Can you tell me what that is?
Mark, what's the name on your DVDs?
Oh, yeah.
And this is an earlier
This
collection.
is very early movies of mine. Like this is before 2000. I've made like many since then. But the name is Savage Cinema from Down Under. That's the name of the box set.
And,
Thank you.
You Cinema from Down Under.
Yeah.
I would encourage everyone to look for the trailer for Hell's Coming for You, because it's hitting distributors like literally in a month or so. But the trailer's available on YouTube now. So look at Hell's Coming for You. I act in it. He acts in it. Mark directed it. We all wrote it. I would love for you guys to check it out.
And if I could add, leave some comments. Let us know what you think of the trailer. We talked about doing trailers. Let us know. Give us some comments. There's a comment section. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, once again, thank you. Next month, we have a special treat. Clay Stafford, who is an American best-selling and award-winning author, poet, screenwriter, playwright, film, and television producer, a bit of a theme here, director, showrunner, actor, book, film, and stage reviewer, as well as public speaker. He has sold nearly 4 million copies of his books and has his work distributed in 16 languages. He is founder and CEO of the annual Killer Nashville International Writers Conference and a contributor monthly to Writer's Digest magazine on his column Killer Writer. So he's the writer of Writer's Digest as well. And he will be here third Saturday of the month, not unfortunately in person, but he will be here with us. And that's it. Oh, the title of his talk, Incorporating Mystery, Thriller, and Suspense into Any Work. Back to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And Tim and Mark, you've given us a great presentation and a lot of food for thought. And I'm sure all the writers here appreciate it deeply. And it's wonderful the way you were so open about how to do it and what you do, and your sharing attitude. That's great. And
Thank you.
I can see why you guys are so successful. Okay, and we'll wrap it up now. And for those of you going to lunch at the Mexican restaurant, have a good lunch. And for the rest of us, we'll see you next time.